Curse. Red Retold. A Tale in the Romance, a Medieval Fairytale series. Written by Demelza Carlton. Autonarrated by AI Charlotte from Google. 1. When Boris laid down his sword at the end of the day, it felt so much heavier than when he'd buckled it on this morning. Was it the weight of the lives he'd taken, or the blood the blade had drunk during battle? "I brought water for you to wash, your highness," Igor said, sloshing the contents of his bucket into the bowl before the squire dropped the bucket on the floor. "Do you want me to help you out of your armor too?" Boris was perfectly capable of taking his own clothes off, and any other day he'd have said so, but they'd been fighting since dawn, and there wasn't a bit of his body that wasn't complaining of weariness. "Please," he said instead, lifting his aching arms to give the boy better access to the buckles on his breastplate. His previous squire wouldn't have asked, he'd have simply made himself useful, but Kirilu had earned his knighthood a year ago now, and he now served Boris's brother, Yarek, in the north. Igor still had some growing to do, as well as a lot of learning, before he'd be as good as Kirilu. "It'll need a good clean and polish before the morrow, for we march for home in the morning," Boris added. Igor's thin shoulders lifted in a massive sigh. "Yes, your highness." He'd learned not to complain, but his sulky expression said he wanted to. Boris hid his smile. He hadn't liked cleaning armor at Igor's age either, but he'd known blood could eat at steel like rust, weakening what needed to be strong. Armor had saved his life more than once, and Boris appreciated the value of well-maintained gear. "Tell the cook I'm ready for supper too," Boris said. "After that, I won't need you until breakfast." Igor nodded and dashed away. Boris barely had time to finish washing and don fresh clothes before his knights began to arrive to deliver their reports of the day's battle. "I lost 6 of my men today in an ambush, but we found the Bisanai camp," which wouldn't have had much of value in it. The food they'd stolen from the villages south of here was likely long gone. "All our dead are buried, your highness. Far fewer than the enemy dead. My men are still working on the pit to bury all of them." Boris wasn't sure the Bisanai would appreciate the good Christian burial his men gave them, but as they were dead, they weren't likely to complain about it. "We're down 2 horses, but only minor wounds among the men. 2 war horses would be costly to replace, but the knights who'd lost them could surely afford it." As they'd all head home on the morrow, it wasn't likely they'd need new war horses until next year's campaign. "My scouts report no more Bisanai within a day's ride." No Bisanai they could see anyway. The mountain dwellers could be hiding under a rock just outside camp, and they'd never know until someone decided to use the rock as a latrine. "Your supper, your highness." Igor was getting better at not spilling the stew. The pot was still more than half full. 2 of the Bisanai got away, vanished into the mountains. If only they'd stay in the mountains, instead of coming to raid their villages. Then Boris and his men could stay at home, polishing benches with their ever-broadening butt cheeks as they feasted on this victory until the next enemy dared to invade their borders. Boris suppressed a smile. He and his men were not made for polishing benches, or growing fat from feasting. Much like his father, who would have ridden out with them, had his health not prevented it. "Where to next, your highness?" Boris raised his head to find all his men watching him with an air of expectation. Good men, loyal men, who had earned a victory feast a dozen times over during this grueling campaign. "On the morrow, we pack up and head for the capital. God willing, we'll be feasting in Preslav before we know it." A ragged cheer rose up, followed by a chorus of thanks. To him, to God, to the saints and whoever else they prayed to in the heat of battle. "Your father would be proud, your highness," said Sir Cyril, the oldest of his knights. Boris acknowledged the older man's praise with a grave nod. "Indeed. As am I to have fought with so many good men in my father's stead." The men trooped out, leaving Boris with his now empty supper bowl. He couldn't remember eating a bite, he'd been so busy. Probably for the best, those newly dead war horses had likely gone into the stew pot. The court in Preslav might not be his favorite place to be, but at least his father's kitchen served more than old horse. Even better would be a meal at home, with his wife and daughter. Would baby Leda be walking and talking yet? She'd barely learned to smile before he left. How would she have changed in the months he'd been away? He couldn't wait to find out. Boris blew out the candle and lay down to dream of family dinners instead of fierce fighters who wanted him dead. He was going home. 2. "And this is my heart," Mother said, placing Rossa's hand on her breast. Through the layers of linen and wool, Rossa could barely feel the thump of her mother's heart. Not like when her hand was against her own skin. If she could just reach through the wool and linen. Rossa bit down so hard on her lip that it hurt. She opened her mouth to cry out, but then she felt it. The deep drum of her mother's heart, as it squeezed and expanded inside her. Fascinated, she focused on the heart and the blood pumping through it. Streaming out in 1,000 directions, keeping her mother alive. She could look but not touch, the memories from her ancestors told her. To touch was to kill, and an enchantress never used her magic for evil. "They come! They come!" The shout from above, followed by thunderous footsteps racing to the bottom of the tower, sent Mother's heart fluttering like a bird's wings. "What is it, Raphael?" Mother asked. The healer man who lived in the topmost tower room stuck his head through the tapestry into Mother's chamber. His eyes were fever bright. "I don't know, but there's a large party coming up the road. Maybe they've come to tell us it's safe to go home." His head disappeared and Rossa heard his feet on the stairs once more. Mother said a bad word. "Stay here in the tower, Rossa. I will come fetch you when it's safe." Rossa nodded. Mother left. Rossa grew tired of sitting alone in Mother's chamber, so she pushed the tapestry aside and climbed to the top of the tower, where Raphael kept watch. She wasn't sure what he watched for, but she knew it made him frown and sigh a lot. But when she reached the top, she couldn't find Raphael, and she was too short to see out the windows. She repeated Mother's bad word several times. But it didn't lift her any higher. She said the bad word again, then headed down the stairs. She'd be able to see the road from the bailey. It was a long climb for her short legs, but Rossa kept going. She wanted to see the party. There was no one in the great hall, but someone had left the doors open, as if they knew she was coming. Giggling, she broke into a run. After only a few steps, she tripped on the uneven flagstones and went sprawling. Pain flared in her shin, and Rossa let out a yowl. "Rossa?" That was Mother. Mother would take her to the still room and cover her in smelly herbs and bandages, and she'd miss the party. Rossa jumped to her feet and raced for the doors. "Rossa! Get back here! Rossa!" Mother could not run as fast as her. This was a race, and Rossa knew she would win. Daddy was in the bailey, and he always caught her. Rossa ran straight for him. Sure enough, he scooped her up in his arms, sending her soaring like the eagles higher up in the mountains. But there was a horse coming, heading straight for Daddy. Focusing on the still stinging graze on her shin, Rossa held up her hand to stop the horse. The horse rose up on his back legs, almost like he was dancing. The fat man on his back rolled off and landed in the dirt. Rossa giggled. She'd never seen a man roll like a ball before. Oh, but the horse did not like dancing. Rossa reached out, touching the horse's back, so he set his hooves on the ground again. Only she hadn't reached with her hand, but with an invisible hand made of magic. The fat man got up and said things to Daddy and Mother. Daddy stiffened, his arm tightening around Rossa while his other hand went for his sword. Daddy only used his sword on evil men, he told her. To cut out their evil hearts. That meant the fat man was evil. Would his heart look different to Mother's? Rossa reached out just to look, not to touch. The evil man's heart was different to Mother's. It looked like it was straining, not strong enough to pump the blood, which didn't stream like Mother's. There was a dark lump trapped inside. Was that what evil looked like? Mother shouted for a healer, drawing Rossa out of her reverie. The evil man had collapsed on the ground. As Rossa watched, his evil heart beat slower and slower until it ceased beating altogether. Rossa didn't need to ask if the man was dead. Daddy wore one of his hidden smiles, the sort he wore when Rossa did something funny that Mother didn't like, and he had to hide his smile from Mother. Rossa gave a little nod. She wasn't sure how, but her father had killed the evil man. Stopped his heart dead. One day she vowed she would be just like him. Evil men would fear her, and good people would come to her for help. Just like Daddy. 3. Boris woke with the dawn, as was his habit. The war might be over for the moment, but old habits died harder than a Bissonai berserker. His wife Vika lay asleep beside him, and little Leda was curled up in her cradle in the corner. A reminder of who he fought for and why he spent so long away, protecting his wife and child, as well as all the wives and children in his father's kingdom. They deserved to sleep safely in their beds too. His men camped in the fields outside Rostov would be awake. He'd made it a habit to break his fast while walking through the camp, exchanging words with not just his knights but their men too. He could do that this morning and still have time to return to the house and have breakfast with Vika when she woke. Boris dressed, not bothering to put on his armor today. What danger had he to fear here at home? The camp bustled with activity, quite the opposite of his quiet home. A rider galloped past him, headed for the command tent in the center. Instinct made Boris change course to follow the lathered horse. Whatever tidings the man carried, they must be urgent. When he reached the command tent, both horse and rider had gone, but a pensive Sir Cyril stood in conference with several other knights, frowning at the missive in Cyril's hand. "Well met, Your Highness," Sir Cyril called, spotting him first. The other knights merely bowed and made way for him. Boris nodded at the paper. "What news?" The knights eyed each other, none wanting to speak the ill words aloud. Cyril sighed. "Prince Yaroslav sends word from the north. Your father has succumbed to his illness, and your brother now sits upon the throne." Grief caught Boris's heart in its mailed fist. "My father is dead?" "It seems so, Your Highness. Your brother Svitopolk is king now." Boris started in surprise. "Svitopolk? But I thought—" Boris had never truly thought about which of his father's sons would take the throne upon his father's death, but for his father to name his bastard son Svitopolk as his heir over any of his legitimate offspring seemed more than a little strange. As the oldest legitimate son, coming home from a successful military campaign, surely Boris himself would be the better choice. Not that he wanted a throne. No, he wanted his father on the throne, so he could tell him about the campaign. Now that tale would go untold. "Your brother Yaroslav sent you a gift, the fruit of a successful hunt in the far north. A small token of his affection and loyalty, he says." Cyril gestured, and one of his men held out a bulky package. Boris had no choice but to take it, and, with all eyes upon him, open it too. Creamy white fur spilled out, lined with lamb's wool. It was at once the most beautiful and the most impractical cloak Boris had ever seen. In battle it would turn from white to red in a day, and then to black and rust after that. This was a cloak for court. "Prince Yaroslav is coming south to join his forces with yours so that he might set the rightful king upon the throne," Cyril said. The rightful king was the heir his father had chosen. Had father really chosen Svitopolk to be king? "We will fight beside you, Your Majesty," Sir Cyril said, dropping to one knee. The other knights did the same. Boris shook his head and gestured for them to get up. I'm your prince, not your king. I will not go to war against my brother, if he is my father's chosen heir. My father was a good and wise king, and he would have made his choice with as much wisdom and forethought as any other decision he made. I must ride for Preslav immediately to see my new king and offer him my allegiance. We will ride with you, Your Highness, Cyril said. Once again Boris shook his head. I shall go alone. King or not, Svitopolk is my brother. We are family. If my father chose him as king, then I am honor-bound to serve him as I served my father. As are we all. I have no need of an army at my back to speak to my brother, even if he is now my king. Your Highness. Cyril was too loyal a man to say the words, but his expression said he had grave misgivings about this course of action. Boris was decided. Send the men home to their families. We will not campaign again before spring, unless the king orders otherwise. Yes, Your Highness. The knights dispersed, leaving Boris to shake his head and sigh. He'd hoped for more than a knight in Vicar's arms, perhaps enough knights to sire a son, but it was not to be. He was a prince first and a husband second. First he must serve his king and his kingdom, and then he might spend a quiet winter with his wife and daughter. Home would still be here when he returned from court. Nodding to himself, Boris trudged home to don his traveling clothes once more. 4. Ready? Father asked. Rossa nodded sharply. How many targets today? She would get them all this time, she swore. Without missing a single one. Father tilted his head to the side as though he needed to consider for a moment before he said, 12. Another nod and she was off. She caught sight of the first one, half hidden behind a tree. She slipped around the other side of the thick trunk, then plunged her dagger into the target's neck, or where it would have been had the target been a man and not a stuffed sack. An ambush like this one usually had more than one in line of sight of each other. Rossa pressed against the straw corpse, scanning the trees for his accomplice. Ah, there it was. Carefully, she strung her bow and took aim at the painted acorn, set high in the fork of a tree on the other side of the path. When she loosed her arrow, she didn't wait to watch it hit its target, as she knew it would. Instead, she shifted to a new position and scanned the forest for other targets. High-low behind trees and rocks, she took out her targets, disarming 2 traps and springing a third, rendering it harmless until her count reached 11. One more to go. She followed the game trail in a long loop, back to where they'd started, but she didn't see a hint of a target anywhere. Had she missed one on her way, which now lay behind her, or had her father placed it at their meeting point, ready to ambush her when she thought she was safe? While there were many who wished to engage the services of an assassin, hired killers were not well liked, and their heads often fetched as high a price as the people they killed. So her father would definitely have placed a target where it might shoot her in the back, when she reached the meeting point. Rossa skirted the clearing, selecting a tree that would give her a good view across the dell where she knew her father waited, while its branches would hide her from the sight of anyone who might hope to catch her unawares. Zoticus sat on a rock in the sun, calmly slicing up an apple with his dagger, before popping the slices in his mouth one by one. The loud crunching sounds surely would have alerted any would-be assassins to his presence and made him an easy target. But father had so many magical protections, even Rossa wasn't sure she could fight him and win. The 12th target would be somewhere that gave it a clear view of the clearing, and the path Rossa would have taken, if she hadn't chosen to climb a tree. She scanned the clearing, then the tree line, then did it all again. It had to be there. The 12th one had to, there. Just as she saw a hint of red paint, it vanished. Yet something was there, moving along the tree branch. She knocked an arrow to her bow, sighting along it as she exhaled. Her arrow flew across the clearing, sinking into its target before tumbling off into the undergrowth. There. Mission complete. Rossa slid down the tree trunk and skipped into the clearing. "I'm done, father," she announced. She couldn't keep the pride out of her voice. "How many did you take down?" "All 12. "Ah, but you missed one," he said, rising. On the rock he'd been sitting on, a patterned sack came into view. Rossa knew better than to argue. He'd said 12 and she'd hit 12, but here was a 13th to taunt her. She drew her dagger and flung it at the cloth. The blade struck the center of the target, then tipped over onto the ground, taking the sack with it. "All 13, she said. "And now you're a blade short, with only half a quiver of arrows, going to meet the contact who sent you on your quest. Not all men are honorable, and those who would hire one assassin to kill for them aren't above hiring others, so that they don't have to pay the first," father said, drawing both daggers. Rossa swallowed. She had one knife in easy reach, but to draw any of the others, she'd need to take her gaze off her opponent, which would be a costly mistake. Perhaps if she could reach the sack and the knife she'd thrown. She edged away from her father, hoping to put the stone between them before he advanced. A shrill scream rose from the trees behind her. "What in heaven's name?" she began. Before she could finish, she found herself flat on her back, without the breath to say another word. The screaming had stopped. "This is what happens when you kill an innocent and leave them to suffer," her father said, holding up one of her arrows, which impaled both a painted acorn and a squirrel who had tried to steal it. The limp squirrel would never scream again. Rossa shuddered and sat up. She dragged in a breath, then said, "But it was a thief stealing my acorn." "Thieves are beneath an assassin's notice. So is anyone except the target who deserves to die. Unless you are hired to kill a thief or the thief threatens your life, he is nothing to you. Justice will find him without your help." Father slid the squirrel's body off the arrow and tossed it into the trees. "And you never hurt innocents." "Thieving squirrels aren't innocent. The monks up at the castle swear about them all the time," Rossa protested. Father just frowned. "Collect your things, then we'll return home. A good assassin never leaves a trace," Rossa finished for him, sighing. Her father might have finished arguing with her, but she knew she hadn't won. No one could beat her father in a fight or an argument. Least of all her. Father inclined his head. "You have learned so much, Rossa. If I'd only known half what you do now when I was your age." Now it was his turn not to finish his sentence. Instead he sighed. There was darkness in his past, from long before he met Mother, Rossa knew, but he never talked about it. She'd asked Mother, who'd told her that everyone had regrets, and her father's were for the people he could not save, which is why he had chosen his line of work in the first place. He trained her so hard so that when her time came to exact justice, she would have no such regrets, she'd save those who needed it. But after today's debacle, her time wouldn't be for a while yet. Rossa sighed and tramped back along the game trail to retrieve her arrows. 5. Dusk smudged the sky when Boris trudged up the steps to the throne room in Preslav, not pausing to take off the white fur cloak. The usual crowd of courtiers and petitioners was gone, so the king had finished hearings for the day. But the route to the royal apartments lay through the throne room, so he crossed the empty hall and kept going. As Svitopolk was a bastard, he'd had much more modest chambers in the palace than those given to Boris and his legitimate brothers, so it didn't surprise Boris at all to find his brother had already moved to the king's apartments. What did surprise him was that his brother sat alone, his head and shoulders bowed with the weight of the kingdom he now carried. "Is the crown so heavy, brother?" Boris asked. Svitopolk lifted his head. "Boris? Oh, you do not know how good it is to see you, brother." The two men embraced, and as Svitopolk leaned against him for just that moment, Boris wondered if it was the weight of kingship he felt, a burden that was far more than one man could bear. "How fared you in the campaign against the Bisanai?" Svitopolk asked eagerly. Father talked of little else in his final days. He made me swear I would not hinder you in your work, preserving our borders against those cowardly raiders. His greatest regret was not leaving a peaceful kingdom for his people. Boris forced a smile. The campaign ended in victory, or I should still be out there fighting them. What few Bissani that were left fled into the mountains. They will not trouble us again for a while. And surely that cannot be all our father spoke of in his final moments. He named his heir, did he not? Svitopolk shook his head. What? A flash of triumph sparked in Boris's breast. He knew father had not chosen Svitopolk as his successor. I fear father was too ill to know what he said at the end, for I scarcely believe it myself. In between his constant talk of you and your campaign, he made me swear to take the throne so you could stay in the field and fight. When the kingdom needs a king to make war on one front and another to sit on the throne and keep the peace with our neighbors, he had to choose, he said. So he said I should take the throne, so that you could command our armies. His final act was to declare the legitimacy of my birth, so that I might be crowned upon his death. I protested that you would make a better king, but he ordered me to be silent, unless I wanted to go to war in your place. Heaven knows I am no warrior. Svitopolk laughed. As a bastard born of the king and a serving girl, Svitopolk's blood had not been considered noble enough to cross swords with the other princes and young noblemen in the practice yard. Yet now he was the highest man in the land, with no sword skills to speak of. No, Svitopolk would not have survived even his first battle against the Bissani. So it is true? Father named you as his heir? Boris pressed. For my sins, yes. I wish he had chosen someone better suited, but how can any son deny his father one last dying request? Svitopolk's eyes appeared haunted for just a moment, before he managed a smile. But you are here and victorious too, so we must have a feast to celebrate. I'll send word to the kitchens, and you shall sit at my right hand at the high table, so that we may drink to our father's memory and the peace he did not live to see. I would be honored, your majesty. And on the morrow I will swear fealty to you before the whole court, Boris said. His brother would not lie about such things. His father had chosen him to be king, with Boris as his general. Indeed, how could any dutiful son deny his father's last request? Family did not betray family, after all.